Offworld Industries, the creator of Squad and the publisher of Postscriptum, recently threw their weight behind a new project entitled Beyond the Wire, a World War I platoon-wide tactical shooter being developed by a new studio called Redstone. Beyond the Wire just entered early access, and I have now put roughly 15 hours into the game, and I feel comfortable offering a review of this early access project. If you're looking to pick up a copy of one of my favorite tactical shooters like Squad or Postscriptum, or eventually Beyond the Wire once it is added, I invite you to take a look at my new game store, nexus.gg/controlledpairsgaming, where you can purchase the game for Steam, and a portion of that sale will benefit the channel directly. I'm Controlled Pairs, and I play the most immersive PC games in the world. This is Beyond the Wire. So I have to start off this review with a little bit of a disclaimer, not because this video is endorsed by Beyond the Wire, it is not, and not because I've been paid to provide any specific remarks about this title, because I haven't, but because this is a game that I am naturally going to be interested in. It's a game that I'm naturally going to want to like. I like Offworld Industries as a publisher. I love the WWI core that has created games like Squad and Postscriptum, and those experiences that are delivered in those games are experiences that appeal to me personally because of the teamwork required to be successful, because of the level of immersion that these games achieve, because of the communication that occurs across teams, because of the amount of content that is included in each one of those projects. So with all of those things in mind, up front, I've got to say that I enjoy Beyond the Wire. It is fun, it is the experience that I was hoping for and wanting out of a World War I tactical shooter, and I think that Redstone nailed it when they made this game. I'd also say, as another disclaimer, that this is a title that is in early access. So while there is plenty of content already available in the game is not yet fully released, and we don't actually have a timeline for when a full release might occur. If we look at Squad as an example, the full release from early access launch to the full release in version 1 of the game took roughly 5 years. Now, I don't think Beyond the Wire is going to take 5 years because they're working on a new Unreal Engine, and they're also working on the WWI core, which is now more fleshed out. I do think that it is going to take some time. With all of that said, the experience that we're getting for the money with this early access title is already very good. If you're more interested in learning what Beyond the Wire offers in the way of gameplay mechanics and features, I've already done a complete gameplay overview, and I invite you to take a look at that. It's linked on screen right now. If you've played the game a little bit, or if you've watched some videos and you're kind of just waiting to see if it's a game that is interesting to you or one that you want to buy, this video is more aptly designed for you. And I want to describe to you why I enjoy Beyond the Wire, what I think they've nailed, and what I think they need to improve upon. First, some of the things that I described that Postscriptum and Squad get right already, Beyond the Wire immediately gets an A+ for. So the teamwork required to be successful in Squad and Postscriptum still exists in Beyond the Wire. The voice communication required to interact with members of your team and then maneuver successfully to capture points throughout the game works very well, and it makes Beyond the Wire a World War I game that is already fun and already engaging if you're looking for a social experience to couple with the tactical shooter experience that you're going to get with the gunplay and the design of the maps and levels and the weapons. While tactical shooter aficionados like myself are really interested in the nature of that social interaction that we enjoy with our favorite games, it is a drawback to certain types of players. If you're a fan of this channel, then you know that I love highly challenging and complex immersive experiences, and Beyond the Wire does deliver that. It is accessible, and we're going to talk some of the ways that it becomes accessible here in a second, but I should mention that because of the nature of these social interactions, an experience isn't going to be as enjoyable if you find yourself in a public match with people who are unwilling to communicate. Now, that's a drawback that I think exists across the genre, and no one has yet figured out a way to solve the problem, because the way to solve the problem hinges not on the developer, but on the players using the tools that the developer provides the players. With all of that in mind, I think it's important now to take a look at the gameplay loop and the way the game feels when you play it. Because while I've referenced Squad and Postscriptum a lot in this discussion, it is not Squad, and it is certainly not Postscriptum. It is a beast completely in and of itself. And when I learned that Offworld Industries was partnering with Redstone to create a World War I tactical shooter, I have to admit that I had some reservations. My concern lied in the fact that a World War I game has to achieve a certain visceral feel for it to be considered authentic in my mind. And the challenge with achieving a visceral feel frequently means that the player experience could suffer as a result of that visceral feel. Here's what I mean. World War I was one of the most disgusting, bloody, and brutal conflicts in the history of the human species. There was millions of soldier fatalities and millions of civilian fatalities. And a lot of this lied in the fact that we found ourselves facing a modern army for the first time in history. All sides employed machine guns and armored vehicles and overwhelming artillery barrages. And of course, we had the introduction of chemical weapons for the first time. Now, those are awful things that is going to be really challenging for a developer to include in a game because it could negatively affect the player experience. Sure, we don't want to get in these long lines of trenches only to stand up and attempt to charge across an open field in the face of this modern technology, only to be mowed down the moment that we expose ourselves, going over the top, as it were. No, the players want the sensation of going over the top. They want the feel of being a part of this enormous army and coordinating these incredible charges with their comrades on their left and right, but they don't want to be killed and farmed over and over again. So how does a developer then solve that problem of a gameplay loop that seems as though it would have to be incredibly punishing, but instead make it fun? Well, Redstone figured it out, and I think the way they figured it out is twofold. They removed tickets from the game, at least so far, and I hope that it's a decision that they stick with. So whereas in Squad and Postscriptum, the team that runs out of tickets first is no longer able to spawn and loses as a result of running out of tickets, Redstone does not penalize teams with tickets and instead allows you to respawn relatively quickly and get back in the fight right away. The drawback to that gameplay decision is that when you respawn, you are no longer punishing your team with that loss of tickets, and so there's not as much of an incentive to use the medic class to preserve tickets, and the only benefit then of using the medic class is to revive teammates closer to the front line. I think this is a net positive for the gameplay. It means that while still facing a rapid time to kill and still allowing machine guns and gas in these wide open engagement areas with only cover and concealment and micro terrain to protect you, while all of those things still exist, players are still fearful of death, but not so fearful that they are unwilling to expose themselves and be a part of one of these magnificent charges where you have waves of soldiers flying across the battlefield to face their enemy. And that's good. That's a win. That's exactly what we want out of a tactical shooter experience set in World War I. Anything less than that would result in 1 or 2 or 3 people trickling across no man's land and being picked off piecemeal, and that player experience is not something that anyone would enjoy, especially not in a game like Beyond the Wire. It also means that Beyond the Wire attracts a different player base than Postscriptum and Squad, a more casual player base, and I don't mean that in a menacing way. I'm glad these players are a part of the community. And if you, listening to this and watching this right now, are someone who hasn't touched their toe into the tactical shooter community, Beyond the Wire might be a good title to be getting involved in, because it does allow you to get into the action pretty quickly. The maps are an appropriate size where you're going to be in a firefight shortly after you spawn, and you're not going to be penalized with a ridiculously long respawn timer, and you're not going to be penalized for giving up and spawning back at your outpost or your fob to get back in the fight right away because you were not taking tickets from your team. That's a win. The next thing I want to talk about is weapons and melee. And melee is kind of a weird one to add to a tactical shooter discussion, but it's really important, especially in the context of World War I. Remember, we're talking about a time period in the early 1900s where most soldiers carried a bolt-action rifle. In a scenario like this, where indeed most people don't have a high rate of fire, you will find yourself in a position where you are transitioning to melee more frequently than in other games. And I think that Redstone does a good job of offering a new dynamic that I've never seen before in any shooter game that makes melee more engaging and more fun than it would be in most other scenarios. They've instituted a directional attack and block system. This means that if you have a melee weapon selected, the direction that you move your mouse will be the direction that you attack from. Similarly, if you are on the defense, you have the opportunity to parry or block using your own melee weapon, but it has to be timed appropriately and you have to match the direction of the person attacking you. If you're listening to this and you're saying, hey, that sounds a lot like Chivalry or a lot like Mordhau, it is. It feels a lot like that, and the controls are very similar to that, and it means that you might find yourself firing a couple shots from your bolt-action rifle, but instead of reloading, jumping into a trench and pulling out a spiked bat and engaging in that hand-to-hand, close-quarters melee combat before ultimately reloading and continuing your assault. I found the melee to be really fun and really engaging, and they've actually added another kind of interesting dynamic that makes it even more interesting, and that is there's squad abilities. So this is a ultra-realistic World War I tactical first-person shooter that institutes something that's a little bit outside of the realm of what you would expect within the genre. If you're a section leader, which is the base leadership position, of which there are several section leaders across each side. Section leaders make up the full team and can communicate with other section leaders, and they provide more specific orders to the people within their section. But if you are one of these section leaders, you have the ability to activate an ability that will provide a buff to the stats of those members of your sections that are close enough to you to benefit from it. In the case of a melee assault, for example, a section leader might order the people within his section to stand up and go over the top and charge with their bayonets affixed to their rifles into an enemy trench. And when he does that, he can bring up a radial menu and select the charge speed buff, which will then allow the people in his squad to run faster for a period of time, get across no man's land quicker, enter the enemy's trench quicker, and dispatch those foes more efficiently. It's kind of an odd thing to add to the game, but I think it is a realistic addition, and it incentivizes the leadership that these games benefit from so frequently, and it also incentivizes the kind of mass and wave after wave of assault that we want to experience in a cinematic World War I game, and it also incentivizes this interesting melee system that the game has instituted. All in all, the respawn mechanics, the lack of tickets, the melee system, the leadership abilities found at the section leader level, and the weapons included in the game create a very unique, a very rewarding, a brutal, and fast-paced World War I experience that is accessible to people who are playing tactical shooters for the very first time and rewarding to veterans of the genre. Now, as this is a review, I do feel obligated to talk about some of the technicals and some of the drawbacks of the game. First, it is an early access title, and at launch so far, we've got 3 maps, we've got several sides, but by and large, the content just isn't fully fleshed out, and it's clear they've invested much of their time in the gameplay loop and mechanics rather than level design and some of the other things that we might become more accustomed to later within the early access timeline. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the controls. It feels a lot like Squad. You've got the same kind of customizations, but there are some drawbacks to the way that the gunplay feels. In particular, there's a lot of weapon sway where it doesn't feel like there should be. The weapons kind of float a little bit on you. It's totally manageable, and I do think that rifle fire and pistol fire in the World War I era should be challenging just based off of the restrictions of technology at the time. It goes a little bit beyond that right now. I think it's probably something that they'll dial back, and it'll be more enjoyable as the game continues to progress, but I do feel that it is important to mention right now. As far as optimization goes, the game runs really good on my rig. You can see a full breakdown of what my rig looks like in the description below. Bottom line, I've got an i7 with a 2070 and an SSD, and it feels pretty good. I'm able to run it on max settings without issues. I do get the occasional stutter if there's a lot of textures or a lot of polygons on the screen, but it is pretty rare, and for the most part, I'm running between 50 and 70 frames without any issues at all. The graphics are good. It's running on the Unreal Engine, and I think it looks a little bit better than Postscriptum and not quite as good as Squad's latest Fallujah and version 1 update. I would say the map design is excellent, and the maps are incredibly immersive. They've added furniture, they've added a ton of battle damage, they've added a lot of fortifications and things that really bring the map together, and because they're a little bit smaller, I think we do get a little bit more detail, but that level of detail might put some strain on people with more mid-range systems. In closing and in summary, I'd tell you that Beyond the Wire is among the top tier platoon-wide tactical shooters available for purchase on the market right now. It's still an early access title that does have some bugs and some development in front of it, but it delivers an incredible experience set in an interesting period of time that not many other games are able to communicate effectively. The developers have created an engaging and new gameplay loop that lovers of the genre are really going to enjoy, and new players are going to find interesting and action-packed enough to come back to over and over again. Like all other tactical shooters, it does suffer from itself in that it requires the players who are engaging with the product to become the content makers for it. You require excellent leadership, excellent communication, and great friends to play with to really get the most out of this title. That's not to say you can't enjoy a public match, but it does mean that you need a microphone, and when you join a public match, you should be prepared to talk to your teammates. If you enjoyed this review or you find my content valuable, I appreciate your support. There's a couple ways you can support the channel. One of them is by purchasing the games that I play through my website at nexus.gg/controlledpairsgaming. The easiest way to support the channel is simply by subscribing and turning on notifications. Of course, if you'd like to contribute directly, you're able to join the channel for as little as 99 cents a month. That gives you special perks that you can learn more about by clicking the blue button down below. I'm Controlled Pairs, and I play the most immersive PC games in the world. This is Beyond the Wire, and I'll see you in the next one.